Good morning, everyone. Today is the ninth and penultimate day of this session, and we are going to do two very interesting sessions today. We are going to take a look back into the styling with little advanced part of styling, but that will be quite useful for you when you want to create websites which are to be consumed or to be used on different viewer platforms like desktop, mobile phones, tabs, uh, etc. So it depends. It adjusts, the layout adjusts itself depending on the screen size. And how can we develop an application which adjusted its layouts automatically is something that we will see today. And in the second session, we will look into some special effects that we can introduce to our content, like text formatting. We have done a bit of text formatting earlier, but some text effects, then transitions, transformations, so 2D transformations and 3D transformations, and transitions. When the property is changing its value, you want to do it in certain way so that user realizes that things are changing, like width is changing. Okay, so it should not be a sudden change. It should be transitioning over a period. And then full-fledged animation. So you can animate your site, your page, your pieces of the page interestingly. So CSS gives you all that as part of CSS3 definition. And we are going to take a look at these features, and we will also apply those in our example app that we have been developing so far, so that our app becomes richer and richer. Yesterday, we built the app using JavaScript, and it's quite an impressive application by now. So today, let's take a look at styling so that we can make our app better and better. All right, so let's get started with the first part of today, which is actually session 17 of the entire series. All right. So let's begin with responsive web design. Any idea about what responsive web design could be? I think we discussed about it briefly earlier. So let's take a look at it again. Responsive web design, the purpose here is to make your page look good on all devices. Devices which are smaller in screen dimension and larger in screen dimension, as large as a movie theater screen to as small as a 3-inch mobile phone. Can your web page relay it out depending on the screen width available or screen dimension available? If it is, then your web page is responsive web page. So we will take a look at that in this session. But interesting thing is we can create a responsive web design only using HTML and CSS. We don't need JavaScript to maximum extent unless until we want to respond to user actions. Remember, JavaScript will be useful only when you want to respond to user activities or events or something that you want to do on demand. But if you want to adjust your layout depending on a different screen size, which will not change dynamically, but sometimes it will change. Like you are on a desktop and you are resizing your browser window, then your page layout should adjust itself. But on mobile phones, usually everything works in a full screen mode, so you will generally not change the layout quickly. But when it is loaded for the first time itself, it should be good enough for users' experience. All that is possible using CSS. HTML is of course a content, and CSS will make it lay out differently on different screen or devices. Just take a look at this example. I took it from internet. So this is this is a page which has multiple sections: a header section, a left navigation, a right navigation, a footer, and the content in the middle. So it looks like 3 rows, and the second row has 3 columns as well, right? It looks like a nice grid structure with 3 rows, or you can think of grid as table also. So first row spanned over 3 columns, second row where it has 3 distinct columns, and third row again spanned over 3 columns. So it looks like a 3 by 3 tabular structure. But with table, it will not be adaptive. Tables will not allow you to break the cells automatically down. So you have to not use tables for in responsive web pages. Or if you use table, remember that will not be responsive automatically. So this is the size and this is the layout. When your screen size is large, I mean, if it is a regular desktop browser, I have a 19-inch screen, and it lays out like this. Then if I reduce the size and make it like a tab, a 7-inch or 8-inch tab, and orientation which is portrait, then the appearance changes a bit. What has happened? Any difference that you see between these two screens? The right navigation has come down and it is appearing like a row of its own. So now you can think of it like a 4 rows. First row a header, second row has 2 columns, left navigation and the content, and then third row has the right navigation, and then fourth row has the footer as usual. So basically the right navigation has flown down in the next row. Then if you have to see the same page on a much smaller screen, which is say a mobile phone, a 4-inch or 5-inch mobile phone, again in portrait mode, then the second row is also going to go down. Okay, Jay, you are asking what is footer? Footer is the bottommost section. So generally that is the name given, but there is a footer tag also in HTML. So first section which comes at the top is generally considered as header. The one which is in purple color here is considered as header, and one which is at the bottommost part is called footer, and rest of the things are called content. These are navigations because most likely these will be clickable, and when you click, the content in the middle will change. And here also you have some links. So when you have a bunch of links, those are called navigations, and the middle section is actually displaying the content of your interest. So that is what is called the content section. It's a typical layout where you will have header, footer, navigation, and content, and you can have multiple navigations too, right? Okay, so coming back to this screen dimension, here the width is not enough to have 2 columns. So what has been done here is everything, all 5 sections are flowing one below the other. So header, then left navigation, then content, then right navigation, and then footer. I could not get the entire screen here, but that is how the entire 5 section is laid out. It's that regular div block structure or block display. Now all of these are happening dynamically when the screen dimensions have changed. In the same page, it is going to change. How is that happening? We will learn that step by step because it is not a one single configuration. You will have to go through a few concepts and then some style definitions of your own. And if you are not willing to create your own style definition, for our help, there are so many ready-made CSS style sheets available, ready-made libraries available, which we can use to make responsive websites. So let's just go ahead with the concepts, and that will help. Even if you are going to use a ready-made style sheet, understanding the concepts will be helpful, because that is how you can extend the ready-made library if there is a need for that. So mobile first. We'll talk about mobile first, but let's first understand the concept of viewport, because that is important to understand what mobile first means. Viewport is what? It's the user's visible area of a web page. So basically, the screen size where the HTML content is visible. Your browser's screen, your tab screen, and your phone's screen. So that is called the viewport. If you recall, there was a VW unit that we used often in the dimensions. So width and height and font, we use the viewport or VW unit. That's the same as this viewport. So basically it is the width of or dimension of the screen on which the content is to be viewed. Okay. Now, viewport is something that you will have to specify in your HTML page so that your responsive web design starts working appropriately. So this is a mandatory thing that you will have to do. So what you are going to do, you are going to define a meta tag with name viewport and the content. So meta tag is a special tag which will be present in head section of the HTML. And meta means metadata, means information about something else, or it is basically to be considered like configurations that you pass into the page. It will not be visualized as it is, but it will affect the visualization, it will affect the content treatment. And meta will usually have a key value pair. Key means name and value means content. So meta will have name property and content property. Okay, so in this case, the meta that I am defining, or we are required to define, is the viewport meta. And in content, we are specifying some properties like width equal to device width. Now here what I am saying, well, for width of the viewport, take the entire device width, and initial scale is 1.0, means the zooming factor. Now you will observe that when you have a very large content shown in a smaller screen, the font sizes, etc., will reduce to very little. So in the initial scale, if you set 1.0, that means you want to start at the zoom level 100%. In some of the touch screens, you can zoom in and zoom out. You can increase the zoom. Of course, the content can flow out of the visible area portion of that, but it will still be available to you if you move the screen left and right and up and down, right? So generally, this is a value that is put. And where is this put? Inside the head tag of HTML. We'll see this as an example. So remember, first thing for our RWD is viewport meta definition. Responsive web design or RWD requires you to define viewport in your one of the meta tags. There could be multiple meta tags, but one of those should be viewport. Okay. A meta viewport element gives the browser instructions on how to control page's dimensions and scaling. Fine. So this is the first mandatory thing about RWD and also about mobile first. Now, what is about mobile first? Mobile first says you should design your web page primarily for mobile devices, the small screen, and then conditionally define the layouts for larger screens like tablet or or a desktop browser or a laptop browser. Why that is important is because majority of user, the target user in current situation, are going to see content on mobile phones. It's so ubiquitous. Most of the people will have a mobile phone handy. They will always have a mobile phone in their hand. It is less likely that people will be carrying larger screens like a MacBook or even a tab always. But mobile phone is the handiest thing, and your websites will be visited on mobile phones more often than the others. So the good practice right now is your default styles or your default layout should be for mobile, and then conditionally you specify a different layout for other screen dimensions. Correct? So with that in mind, we have to follow some good practices and some rules. We can consider this as rules too. What are those good practices or rules? Users are used to scroll websites vertically on both desktop and mobile devices. So you use your fingers on the mobile phone to scroll up or scroll down. It's very rare and inconvenient actually for you to use your finger left and right on the screen. You are habitual of scrolling up and down, which is called vertical scrolling. So horizontal scrolling is difficult. So your page should have the content which is good uh, in the default width. There should not be anything overflowing beyond the screen width, and because of that the horizontal bar or scroll bar comes up and user is required to uh, scroll horizontally. That's a bad design. So remember this habit or convenience for users when you are defining the layouts. So do not do what? First rule, do not use large fixed width elements, because if you are using a large fixed width elements, what will happen is it may go beyond the width of the screen, the width that is available on the device, and then it will require user to scroll left and right, scroll horizontally, which will be inconvenient. Scrolling up and down is in practice and it will be okay. So do not try to use large fixed width element. Fixed width. So what's the choice? We shall use relative width. Relative could be percentage, or relative could be in literals, or relative could be in viewport dimensions also, percentage of viewport, right? We can give it a fraction of viewport, so 1% of viewport, and it should never go beyond the viewport width. That means you should never go beyond 100% of the width. Okay, so it is always a good practice to specify width in percentages. Okay, that's the first rule and first practice. Second rule, do not let the content rely on a particular viewport width to render well. So if you are assuming that you will have this much width available, once again you are going to limit yourself only to that screen, and then it will not render appropriately. So you will have to be careful about testing your page on different viewports and see how your width is adjusting. So related to the previous one, but it is again warning you to not assume any viewport width when you are designing your page. And the final thing is use CSS media queries to apply different styling for small and large screens. So this is the best part that comes in CSS3, where you can pre-specify different set of styles for different screen dimensions, and not just screen dimensions, for different media. Suppose you are seeing it on screen and it shows in certain way, but if you want to print it, you want to print it in a different way. For example, on the screen, when you are seeing it, you have a deep background color, or the content is too colorful. But when you are trying to print, you want to print it in black and white without dense background colors, because dense colors will eat a lot of ink out. So you want to have different stylings even for different media, whether it is a screen or print media, or different dimensions of screen height and width, and different orientation also. Say for example, when you have a tab with a landscape orientation, you have larger width available than the height, and if you change the orientation to portrait, you have lesser width available than the height. So your media should, your queries or your layout should be dependent on queries, on media queries, and it should be conditional. Correct? So now the default would be for the smallest screen size, which is for mobile phone. And in mobile phone, generally, we keep the mobile phone in portrait mode, and we rarely rotate it into landscape mode for web page browsing. We rotate it in landscape mostly for media browsing, like video browsing, but for websites, we will generally not rotate it. But if you are creating a web page which will work good in the landscape mode, instruct the user to rotate it in landscape, and then lay it out appropriately for that orientation. Fine. So let's now take a look into the media queries and how we will specify media query in our styles, and then how we can add different style sets for a given particular media. Okay. So it's a technique introduced in CSS3, and this is the power that we need for responsive web design. So we have first specified the viewport, which enables the it gives the initial instruction on laying out the things, and then media queries will help the browser decide on the set of styles that has to be applied on certain screen dimension that is now available, or the orientation, or the media, right? So let's take a look at them. The @media rule to include a block of CSS properties only if a certain condition is true. The @media rule includes a block of CSS properties only if a certain condition is true. Okay, so that is the query that we are going to write, and if the query results into true, only then those media set specific rules will get applied. Rules are what? CSS properties will get applied on the relevant elements. Okay, so let's take a look at the general syntax. We start with @media, that's the reserved keyword, so you have to say that. And the second part is not only media type. So here you can specify the media type. You have two choices basically, screen or print, or you can simply say all, which is basically the default. So you can use not screen, not print, or only print, only screen, or you can simply say all, or you can simply ignore. And then you do and you can add more media features. The first part is for media type, and then you can have many conditions added one after the other as media features. Now there are plenty of media features that you can use in your query, and finally it should have a block of its own where you will do what? You will create lot of rule sets, and those rule sets are like the earlier rule sets that you will define for tags, simple selector based, combinator selector based, attribute selector based, pseudo element based, and pseudo class based, right? So you can define such definitions, you can add such rule definitions within the body of a media query. And you can have multiple media queries as well for different media features, for different media type, and a combination of them. So let's quickly understand the meaning of these special words, not, only, and, or. Not means, as you can imagine, it inverts. So if you are saying at media, not print, so well, it will be applicable on media except the print media. So that means it will be applicable to screen, and in future, if there is some other media type supported, it will be applicable to that. So everything but print. So not will invert or revert the meaning. Only means very specific to that media type. For all others, it will not be applicable. So it's like exclusively for that media type. And or not is like when you are creating a combination, it will be like a logical and or logical or not. So not will again invert. Suppose you are saying not with 100%. Okay, not width 100%. So if there is a situation where width is 100%, it will not be applicable. So like that. So and or not in the media feature combination works as the logical operators. You got familiar with logical operators in JavaScript part, so you can relate to that. The notations were different there. So for and you had double ampersand, for or you had double pipe, and for not you had an exclamation sign, but the purpose and meaning remains the same, right? So you can have multiple conditions, anded, ored, or noted. Okay, let's take an example. So this is one example, and let's understand how it will be interpreted by the browser. At media only screen and max width 600 pixel, body should have a background color light blue. So content that you see inside the body of this media query is easily understandable. It's a simple selector, a tag name based selector for body, and the property that is being set here is only one property, background color, and it is saying light blue. But this CSS will be applicable only when the media query is true. And what is the media query? Only for screen. So media type is only screen. Suppose you are printing the page, this will not be applied. That means background color light blue will not be applied. So white, it will remain white if it is white by default, unless you have changed it. The default background color for body is white. So for print, for example, the thing that I was explaining you earlier, this media query will not be applicable. And the second condition is, first, it has to be a screen. And the second condition is max width 600 pixel. So if your screen size is maximum width wise, if it is up to 600 pixel, then only this media query set will be applicable. If your screen size or screen width is more than 600 pixels, say 601 or 900 or 1500, this particular query is not applicable. So what browser does, it evaluates the media query, and in certain situation, if it is evaluating to true, then the bunch of CSS style rule sets that are defined gets applied. It becomes active basically, and then depending on the selectors, it will get applied at the right elements. All right, so this is very important. And then, as we said earlier, mobile first, I'm repeating it again here, always design for mobile first. Okay, always design for mobile first. That means your default styling should be for mobile and your conditional media queries for the other screen dimensions. Okay, some of the dimensions that are quite common, although if there are very many device dimensions available because of the variety of screen dimensions that are available in the market. Each company is coming up with its own dimension of height and width and resolution and all that. But some of the dimensions that are quite common these days are phones with 600 pixel width and smaller than that, extra small devices where resolution is less. So you can define a media query for that. Then you can define a query for portrait tablets and large phones from 600 pixel and above. Now here you see min width. So the first dimension in the example that we saw was for very small screen phones, which is 600 pixel or less in width. The second query here is for minimum width 600 pixel. Third query is for minimum width 768 pixel. Okay, now you can very well understand that when I am saying min width 600 pixel and again another set of queries min width 768 pixel, that means the min width 600 set will be applicable to min width 768 as well. So sometimes you will see that more than one media queries are evaluating to true and all those styles will get applied together. So you have to be very careful because here by defining media queries, what you are doing is you are only conditionally activating certain CSS rules. And it is highly likely that because of your query, multiple such conditional things get activated at the same point of time. And you also remember that the styles are loaded in the series and applied in the same sequence. So whichever definition comes at the last will remain effective. Remember, external to internal to inline. Okay, so you have to remember this. And even before external, it is the default. Okay, so this is giving you an option to conditionally activate certain set of styles. But this is, so two things we have learned so far about responsive web design. First is viewport definition. Second is media queries to conditionally enable or activate a bunch of rules which is dependent on the screen dimensions and the media type and orientation, etc. There are many properties for media properties which you can take a look at separately in the reference documents, and you can create your media queries appropriately. The next thing that is very important is to understand the grid view structure. The whole problem that we are trying to sort here is utilization of the screen width and height. That means the real estate that is available to display the content. Now, if we have enough width and in width is more than required in for some content. Suppose I have a content which is not going to take say 15% of the whole screen width, and I am putting it there. The rest of the screen space, like here, I have this grid view written on the line, and the remaining space is empty. I could have filled it with something else, but I'm not doing it. It could be a genuine reason, like you don't want your page, or it is just that you did not think of utilizing that extra space with some other content. You did not design your layout which is adaptable to the varying screen dimension, right? So if you have a larger screen, you would prefer to divide it into multiple columns. Just take a look at the newspapers that you have been seeing for years now. In newspaper, you have a very large space, right? It is 4 times a regular A4 size. You are habitual of using a notebook, and newspapers are at least 4 times larger in size. Yeah, it is like 4 pages, A4 side sheets are laid side by side, and 2 in up and then 2 at the bottom. So you can imagine if you have a line to write and you are not able to use the full width of the newspaper, then how much empty space you will leave on the newspaper. And if you have to read a line from left to right, the whole uh, newspaper, how difficult it will be for you to read. So what is being done? The newspaper width is broken. Usually it is broken into multiple columns. So it's, even if it is a one single width page, it is broken into separate columns. And then your content is written in such a way that it is aligned inside one column and the next content is in this next column, and like that, so that you can fold the page horizontally and you can uh, keep it in 1/8 or 1/4 of the whole width of the newspaper, and still you can read the whole content easily. You don't have to keep your whole newspaper page open to read from left to right, right? And that's the concept that can be used quite often on a larger screen dimension. This is not applicable on smaller screen because the width is not enough to have content broken into vertical columns. But for larger screen, this makes a lot of sense. So what we are going to do is basically learn about gridding the screen so that you divide the screen width into multiple columns. So let's understand that now. So page is divided into columns and it depends on the width that is available. Normally what has been observed, a responsive grid view is divided into 12 columns where the total width is 100%, of course, and each column is equally divided into 1/12 of the 100%, so that the screen automatically shrinks and expands as you resize the browser window. So sometimes if you have a content which is not accommodable in the given screen dimension, depending on the width that you have specified, and if the width is not available, it will automatically flow downward so that it takes the available width, because as soon as it goes downward, again 100% width is available for utilization. So if in the earlier dimension total width was not enough, it will come down. Okay, so this is a good way of uh, creating a grid where responsive grids will automatically flow the content down if it is not accommodable in the available screen. Now, so how will we implement it? We will have to do a lot of things here. Fortunately, if we are going to use some of the ready-made CSS style libraries like Bootstrap or W3C provided library, we will not have to get into the details that I'm going to go through now. But it is always good to know this because this gives you a complete understanding of how the grid structure works. So the first and most important thing that you will do is to specify this box sizing property to border box. We have seen this earlier where we have seen that the sizing of the box or the we understood the box model earlier, and we saw how the dimensions are calculated, the height and width, whether it will include the content width with the margin and padding, etc., or margin padding will be additional to the content height and width. When we say box sizing border box, that means the width that we specify is inclusive of content width and padding and margin. So when I specify the width of the box, that is fixed. Everything else like padding, margin and the content width adjust within that box width and box height too, right? So this is very important. Otherwise, your whole layout will go here and there. So box sizing is fixed to border box for all tags. When you have star as the selector, that means it is applicable to everything. Okay, so this is the default thing that we will do in grid view whenever we want to apply grid view. The box sizing is set to border box. The next thing, okay, so this is the explanation. This makes sure that the padding, border are included in the total width and height. Padding, margin, everything. I mean, whichever is inside the border, margin is outside the border, so that will not be counted. But if we have padding, border width, and the content, all that is included here. Okay, now make one class for each of the 12 columns. Make one class for each of the 12 columns. So what does that mean is you will have various column width. So 1 column, 2 column, 3 column, 4 column, 5 column, and like that 12 columns if you have divided your screen into 12 columns. Now 12 column is only indicative and a common practice. You want to decide, you want to break your screen only in 4 columns, so you divide it appropriately. But make sure you have one class for each of the number of columns that you have defined. You can understand it like that. And one column has to have a width equal to 100% divided by total number of columns that you have defined. Say 12 columns, then each column will have a width of 8.33%. So if you're saying my column width dimension has to be 1, then the width of that will be 8.33. But if you say my column width is equal to 4, then the width of that will be 25%, right? So that is how you will have different dimensions specified for different column width. And we will see an example on how to do this. These columns should be floating to left and have a padding. This is again essential so that when you have a floating content, you have seen the behavior of floating, it gets one level up and it just gets attached or hooked to one side of the screen, left or right, depending on what is the floating value set. And when you have a padding, it will ensure that your content is not attached to the border. So there will be spacing between the borders, and margin is avoided. Margin is set to 0 so that there is no space wasted around the boxes that you have created. Okay. And the final thing is columns inside a row are all floating to the left. Columns inside a row, one row, has to be all floating to the left. And finally, what will happen is if you have this, your row will not accept any other content, and because floating makes things appear one layer above, rest of the content will get inside, or it will be placed in such a way as if those visuals do not exist. So it occupies the space that is naturally available for those floating content. Floating content comes one level up, so rest of the content occupies the space that would have been earlier occupied by the floating content. So what you do, you purposely clear the float so that the next content appears at its normal position and does not get behind or under the floating content. And for that, we are going to use this after pseudo element, where we are clearing and then displaying is set to table, which is not really that important. Display block will also do the same. Content empty is something that we are putting because after requires something, and where content is set to empty string basically. So it's basically adding a pseudo element after the class, after the element which has a class row. So sometimes we will use the class row first, and where we will put up a lot of columns, and then this gets applied onto the row element. Yeah, like I said, it may look little too complicated for you, but it is kind of a repeatable thing. So we will always have a whole bunch of definitions ready-made, and then that will induce or make the styles available for us to use. So it's a one-time definition that will make and keep using it throughout our life. In most cases, we will not even define that if we are going to use the ready-made style libraries. So let's take a look at our own responsive task list now. And when we have this ready, our own task list, if you remember, yesterday we had these two sections flow downward. That means at the top we had the new task section, and then below that we had the task list. Today, what I have done is I have introduced the responsive web design, and because of that, I have done three things. One, viewport meta definition. Second, media query for different screen dimensions. And third, I have introduced the grid structure so that I am specifying how much width is to be used for one section and the other section. So all three has been put together to make this app responsive. So when I am seeing it on a larger screen, it appears like this. When I reduce the screen dimension as good as a portrait tab, it appears as a landscape tab, I'm sorry, it appears like this. You can see a difference here. In the desktop view, the task list is much bigger because the new task input would not require too large a width. But here, I had to maintain the width, minimum width of new task. So I said, well, now you occupy more space because task list is adjustable. You don't have to make something too large or too small. So that is how you will distribute the available screen width to different portions. And finally, in the small screen mobile phone, it appears the way it was appearing earlier, the usual vertical flow. So that has not changed. And so what is evident that the design that we created earlier at the beginning was good for mobile, but it was not good for large screens because we were wasting a whole lot of width. And that is where the responsive web design has helped to utilize the available width. So let me now take you to the code and show it in action. So I have this code available. Okay. All right, so now because it has already become complicated, and yesterday itself we had added these doc type, HTML, head, body, etc., right? And in head we had script and we had style. So let me remove the style script part for this time being. We will focus on style because script is not changing today. What is going to change is the styles. But first thing, that is added new is this viewport. Okay, so first thing. Second thing is about some of the new styles. So what I have done is I have added few things important for RWD. This is the first thing. I said set the box sizing to border box, and then I said row after clear because that was needed, and then I said for all classes which have just something like call minus, float it to left. Now you can notice that this is a class with a pseudo element notation. Okay, so we are using all the knowledge that we have gathered so far. A class with a pseudo element, and here what we are doing is we are specifying a attribute selector, and the attribute is class, and then I'm saying class star equal to means it's like a pattern match. So it may have many properties, but if it has something like call hyphen, so if it has a call hyphen present, so any element which has a class property with a value which is having call minus beyond the other values also, then apply these patterns. So these are the basic things that are usually done. So you will generally do what? You will copy and paste these three styles in your style sheet to begin with RWD. Then rest of the things that you have is as usual, and I have just marked it mobile first because all the styles that I had earlier was good enough for mobile first, except one more entry that I have put up is this. Why this is needed? Because as soon as I marked this class star call to float left and padding 15px, this is the width, automatic width for floating content is no more 100% because it just gets reduced in size to just accommodate whatever is it is. So I could have put this in the earlier definition itself. So I can conditionally add this here itself so that, well, everything is by default 100% width, and then we will have overriding width also, which will make this appear differently. But it is always good to split it, and when I have split, ultimately it will get merged in the effect, but it is good for us to easily distinguish because we are going to do a lot of definitions on width after this, right? So when I'm seeing the page, I just browse the page, and I'm browsing the page on smaller width, it appears like this, fine, which is the usual thing that we wanted, and the dimension here is smaller and it appears like it was appearing earlier. Okay, now as soon as I increase the dimension, I will have more width available, and I want to use that width. So you see, as soon as I increase the dimension, the lower section moves up, and when it moves up, it is able to utilize the width better. And then I increase the size gradually further, and you see it is again at one point, it is adjusting itself, readjusting. So basically with changing dimension or changing width of the screen, it is adjusting twice. Once for certain width and then another time for certain width. And how is that happening? I have defined or used the media query. And I'm saying media only for screen. Okay, that means this will be not applicable if I show it in print view. So I just show you one quick way of having this. When I do a print, you will see that it is appearing in the regular form that you will see otherwise. Even if the screen dimension has changed, this is not the layout change are not effective, just because I am changing the layout only when the media is screen. Okay. Then I said media properties, minimum width 600 pixel. So I said minimum width 600 pixel. So if the screen dimension has increased and the screen size has gone beyond 600 or 600 or more, then these set of styles will get applied. And what are these sets? I have defined a bunch of classes, and which is like call minus s minus 1 and width, various width. So what I have done is I have divided the screen into 12 columns, and for each column dimension, say 1 column width, 2 column width, 3 column width, I have put up the width percentages. So for 12 column width, it will be 100% width. So now I can choose this style or that style class on any particular element, and it will automatically be spread over those many columns. Next query is different only in the screen minimum width. So for 600 pixel, these will get applicable, but as soon as the screen width increases to 768 pixel, which is the upper limit of a 8-inch tab, then it is to be considered like, oh, okay, now I'm on a desktop screen. So then I have different styles, and I'm saying, well, I have different styles applicable in this case. Again, for 12, even the class names are different. Here I had class call hyphen s hyphen something. Here I have call hyphen only, no hyphen s in the middle. Dimensions are same, but the class names are different. How will it make difference? We will realize when we will start using these classes on our elements. So how am I using them? Now that is important for us. So I'm using them on two of the sections, first section and the second section, and both of them are wrapped inside its own div, which was earlier having container class only. Now I have added row class only also. Row class is not defined anywhere, but row after pseudo element is defined, and that will have its own effect. Anyway, so even if I have not applied this row, it would work the same way. What is changing here is in the first section, I have added two call styles, call minus 3 and call minus 6, s minus 6 for the first column or first new task section. For second task list section, I have added two additional classes, call 9 and call s6. Now what happens, depending on the screen width, these will get activated. If the screen width is somewhere between 600 pixel and 768, then these will get activated, but these will not get activated. But if the screen dimension has increased or gone beyond 768, both of these will get activated. Both of these will get activated. And in that case, actually both definitions are available for application. But because styles are loaded and applied in the sequence in which it is appearing, this will get applied. Say I have this call S6, okay, call S6 and call 3, both are available. Now both will get applied. Now this order does not matter, but the order in which these definitions are loaded does matter. So if call S6 is loaded first, then that will get applied, all the styles get applied, and then if call 3 is loaded later, that will get applied, and the effects of call 3 will remain because that was loaded later than call S6. Right? So that is making a lot of sense, because when the screen size has gone beyond 768, both the media queries are true. So both sets are active, but calls S6 style is applied first, and call S6 is having what? Width 50%. Then call 3 gets applied because that's the next in loading sequence. So call 3 has what? Width 25%. So call S6 made the width 50%, but again immediately after that call 3 made it 25%. So 50% width was changed to 25%, and because that was the last style setting on width, that remains effective. So even if I have multiple classes and those classes are defining different values for the same property, the last effective application remains, and that is depending on the order of its presence in the definition. So this is how I will always have larger screen dimension media queries written later than the smaller media queries, so that even if the uh, even if multiple queries are getting true, the later ones are effective and the earlier ones becomes ineffective in such cases, because we will generally have the overriding values. Fine. So this is how this whole RWD works. So I have what? Viewport defined. I have some of the basic RWD definitions defined in terms of grids, and then finally a couple of media queries for different screen dimensions, and that is how this whole application has become responsive, right? So we can make any website responsive and respond to different screens types and dimensions if we are using these features which are available out of the box, and we use them nicely. The properties are available in style sheet CSS 3. All right, so that is how we make our applications responsive. Remember, changes that I have made in my task list today are all CSS changes. I have not made any feature changes. So the features that were working yesterday will continue to work today, but it is giving a better experience to end user because it is now responsive. It is utilizing the screen width appropriately, and if screen width is not available, then it will use a different layout so that it is still user friendly. So RWD makes your application user friendly. So that's the end of this session, and if you have questions, I can answer you. In our next session, we will talk about some special effects available through CSS. Any question for now? Okay, so if there are no questions, we will meet again in our next session in 5 minutes. Thank you.